The stranger at St Cuthbert's. It was in the Michaelmas term of his incumbency that the Reverend Simon Harborough first became aware of the peculiar visitation in the churchyard of St Cuthbert's. The parish, a quiet one in rural Herefordshire, had been entrusted to him after his many years of curacy in the industrial Midlands, and he had taken his duties with a sense of relief, for the place was quiet, its boundaries bounded by orchards and cider farms, and its people both courteous and self-contained. The church itself, a modest building of Norman nave and early English chancel, stood overlooking the valley of the Lug. The yews in the churchyard were of great antiquity, and the stones lay crookedly as though leaning in together in whisper. On one of his earliest afternoons, as the light fell across those tilting stones, he became aware of a solitary figure standing in the eastern quarter of the ground. The man was tall, with a long grey coat and a felt hat pulled low. He was motionless, gazing upon one of the older and most weathered stones. At the time, Harborough supposed him to be some antiquarian, or perhaps a distant relative tracing his forebears. It did not disturb him, but the sight remained with him through that evening. In the days following, he observed the same man again, always at the same hour, between 4 and 5, and always in that same posture of silent vigil before the crumbling stone. The vicar, curious, but not yet alarmed, approached him on the 4th day. "Good evening to you," he said in his mild voice. The man turned. His face was pale, the skin tight and colourless. His eyes, grey, almost black, were of a penetrating quality. "I beg your pardon," he said softly. "I intrude upon no one. I stand here only to remember." "You knew one buried here?" "Yes. Anne. She rests beneath." The vicar bent down. The inscription was worn, as to be nearly obliterated, but he did discern fragments. "Liathan, 1774. Daughter of—" "You are kin?" he asked gently. The man gave a curious smile. "Oh, closer than kin. I was her friend. She was wronged, Reverend, betrayed. I come because she cannot rest." The reply, grave and ambiguous, unsettled the clergyman. Yet when he looked up again, the man had already moved away, disappearing through the lynch gate into the dusk. The incident preyed upon Harborough's mind. Being newly come to the parish, he sought counsel from Mrs. Latimer, the elderly widow who served as verger. She pursed her lips at the name Corbin. "Corbins," she said, "had Hollowbrook Farm, beyond the brook. That was all pulled down centuries ago. But they say the daughter, Anne, died of fever or grief. Some say in 1774. They speak little of it now, only that it was a sorrowful business." That night, Harborough searched the registers in the vestry chest. The entry was plain enough. Anne Corbin, buried 3rd October 1774, aged 18 years. And that was it, nothing else. Yet, on a loose sheaf of paper, I found a curious note, written in a hand of the same date. Great affliction in the family of Corbin. The daughter Anne, deceived by a man of fair speech and unworthy life. God have mercy upon her soul. There was no name for the deceiver. Harborough felt a coldness steal upon him as he set the paper aside. The stranger came still, each evening. Once or twice Harborough spoke with him. The name he gave was Charles. His words were always of Anne, and always of sorrow. Yet, as the vicar listened, he began to discern a curious dissonance. Charles spoke not with compassion, but with a strange hunger, as if feeding upon the memory. At night, the vicar dreamed uneasily of a young woman, pale and pleading, with soft weeping borne on the wind through the yews, of cold fingers brushing his sleeve. Once he awoke, certain that someone stood beside his bed, only to find the empty room. By day, he applied himself more diligently to the records. In the archives at Hereford, he discovered correspondence between the curate of Bromfield and his superior. The curate wrote of a seducer who named himself Charles, who promised marriage to the poor Anne Corbin, but vanished when her condition was discovered. The letter hinted at scandal, but spoke also of something more. There is fear in the parish. Some say the man was not of ordinary stock, nor of these parts at all. He came out of nowhere and vanished again as suddenly. The girl wasted and died in grief. May God shield us from his like again. The curate's words disturbed Harborough deeply. He began to suspect that the figure in his churchyard was no mourner, but the very betrayer himself. By late November, the haunting deepened. Parishioners spoke of hearing weeping near the east wall after sunset. One boy swore he had seen a woman in white, standing among the yews, her face hidden in her hands. Harborough himself, crossing the yard one misty dusk, caught sight of two figures beside the grave. The tall, dark man, and beside him a slighter shape, blurred as if by tears. When he blinked, only Charles remained, watching him with a thin smile. That night the vicar prayed long in his study. He knew now that Anne's soul lingered, unquiet, held fast by the presence of her betrayer. To pray for Charles would be blasphemy. It was for Anne that the rites must be read, and Charles must be banished. He copied a form of absolution for the departed, and alongside it an ancient rite of exorcism, seldom spoken in modern times. He resolved to perform them at Anne's grave upon the eve of Advent. The evening came bleak and still. the valley muffled in frost. The vicar went out into the churchyard at midnight, bearing his stole and lantern. The yews loomed vast above him. The stones glimmered pale in the moonlight. At the eastern corner, Charles awaited him, more solid than ever, his face almost luminous in the cold light. "You've come at last," he said. "Pray for me, Reverend. Release me. I have walked so long." Harborough's voice was firm. "It is not you who suffer, but she. It is Anne who weeps here, not you. I will pray, but not for you." At this the man's face darkened, his eyes glinting. Yet Harborough knelt by the grave and began the prayers for the dead. As he spoke, the air trembled, and before his eyes a second figure took form, slender, bowed in grief, the outline of a young woman. She seemed to lift her face a little, as if hearing. Charles stepped forward swiftly, his expression fierce. "No! She is mine! I will never forgive. She will remain." But Harborough raised his voice, reading the words of absolution with all the force of his office. The spectral figure of Anne straightened. Her tears ceased. A faint calm spread across her features. At that moment Charles cried out, his form twisted, grown darker, monstrous. "You cannot free her! I have deceived, I have betrayed, and I shall do it again. She is bound to me." Yet even as he raged, the girl's form grew brighter, until, with a soft sigh, it vanished into the air, leaving only peace behind. Charles shrieked, his shape writhing, torn as by invisible claws. His eyes blazed hatred at the vicar. "You meddle with what you do not understand. I am not done." With that, he was snatched away, dissolving into the night like smoke in a gale. The churchyard fell silent. The grass about Anne's grave stirred, as though in a breath of spring, though frost lay everywhere else. The weeks that followed were strangely quiet. No more weeping was heard, no stranger seen at dusk. The grass upon Anne's grave grew green and straight, as though newly laid. Yet Harborough himself was altered. His hair seemed greyer, his step slower. Parishioners remarked that he avoided the east corner of the yard, though he lingered often in thought before the altar. Once, returning late from a visit, he fancied he saw, beyond the brook, a tall figure waiting upon the lane, hat brim low, coat dark against the hedgerow. When he looked again, it was gone. The villagers of this day say that the new vicar did what none before him dared. He gave rest to poor Anne Corbin, yet they also whisper that the stranger, Charles, is not a man at all, but something older, a deceiver who takes the form of one beloved, and who walks still, seeking another parish another victim. And at St Cuthbert's, when the east wind blows and the ewes sigh, some say you may yet hear a voice, low and coaxing, promising love, but bringing ruin, waiting for one more soul to betray.